Welcome to another story made by Oracle 1. The Living Dolls of the Lonely Farmhouse. Chapter 1. The Farm at the End of the Road. The road narrowed long before it ended. What began as cracked asphalt dissolved into gravel, then dirt, then something closer to memory than infrastructure, a pale ribbon winding through fields that had not been properly worked in years. Tall grass bowed under the weight of wind, its dry heads hissing together like whispered warnings. Fence posts leaned at tired angles, their wire long since snapped or swallowed by weeds. No other cars passed, no houses appeared, even the birds seemed reluctant to cross the sky above this place. Mara Holt slowed her car until it crawled, one hand tied on the steering wheel, the other resting against the door as if she needed the pressure to remind herself she was real. The GPS on her phone had lost signal 10 minutes ago, frozen on a cheerful blue arrow that pointed nowhere. She hadn't expected much else. The listing had been vague in the way rural listings often were, quiet, secluded, perfect for getting away, phrases that meant different things depending on who was reading them. She had wanted quiet. She hadn't expected this. The farmhouse appeared suddenly, rising out of the fields like a forgotten thought. 2 stories, weathered white paint flaking away to reveal gray wood beneath. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, like a tired spine. A porch wrapped around the front, its railings uneven, one post replaced long ago with a mismatched beam that didn't quite fit. Windows stared out across the fields, dark and unreflective, giving nothing back to the sky. Mara parked beside a rusted windmill whose blades no longer turned. The silence pressed in immediately after she shut off the engine, so complete it felt unnatural. No insects buzzed, no leaves rustled, even the wind seemed to hold its breath near the house. She stepped out of the car and smelled old earth, dry wood, and something faintly sweet beneath it all. Like dust trapped in fabric for too long. "This is fine," she murmured, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "This is exactly what you wanted." The porch creaked loudly under her boots as she climbed the steps. The sound echoed, too sharp in the quiet, as if the house were amplifying it on purpose. She hesitated at the door, hand hovering over the knob. The wood was scarred with shallow scratches she hadn't noticed from a distance, thin lines, clustered in places, as though something had once been dragged across it repeatedly. She told herself it was animals. She turned the knob. The door opened easily, swinging inward with a long, complaining groan. Cool air breathed out from the house, carrying the scent of old furniture, stale cloth, and something else she couldn't immediately place. The interior was dim but not dark. Sunlight filtered in through thin curtains, dust motes drifting lazily in the beams. The entryway opened directly into a large sitting room. A couch upholstered in faded floral fabric faced an unlit fireplace. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books, but with dolls. Mara stopped. They were everywhere. Porcelain dolls, rag dolls, wooden dolls carved with simple, expressionless faces. Dolls with glass eyes that caught the light and reflected it back in tiny, unsettling flashes. They sat shoulder to shoulder on shelves, perched on armrests, arranged carefully along the mantel. Some were no larger than her hand. Others were nearly the size of a child. All of them faced inward. All of them seemed to be watching her. "Well," Mara said weakly, forcing a laugh that sounded wrong in her own ears. "That's a theme." She stepped inside, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft but decisive click. The sound made her jump. "Old houses," she muttered. "Old noises." She set her bag down slowly, eyes scanning the room. The dolls were dressed in clothing from different eras, lace collars yellowed with age, tiny boots scuffed and cracked, stitched smiles fraying at the edges. Some were pristine. Others bore signs of rough handling, chipped porcelain cheeks, missing fingers, hair cut unevenly or gone entirely. They were arranged too neatly to be random. Someone had cared about them. A handwritten note sat on the coffee table, weighted down by a small porcelain girl with painted blue eyes and a dress the color of dried roses. Mara approached cautiously and picked up the note. Careful not to touch the doll. Welcome, it read, the ink slightly smudged. The house has everything you need. Please don't move the dolls. They like to stay where they are. Mara stared at the words. That's not ominous at all, she whispered. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, unease settling in her stomach like a stone. The rational part of her mind scrambled for explanations. The previous owner had been a collector, an artist, someone eccentric but harmless. The note was probably meant to be charming. Probably. She carried her bag deeper into the house. The kitchen lay beyond the sitting room, separated by a wide doorway with no door. Sunlight streamed through a window above the sink, illuminating a long wooden table scarred with knife marks and burns. 3 chairs sat around it. Only 3. Mara paused, frowning. It's just me. Her voice sounded smaller here, swallowed by the high ceiling. The kitchen was clean, almost obsessively so. Every surface gleamed. A kettle sat centered on the stove, handle aligned perfectly. On the counter near the back door stood 3 dolls, smaller than the others, arranged in a neat row. They were identical. Each wore a simple cotton dress. Each had the same brown yarn hair, the same stitched smile. Their black button eyes reflected no light at all. Mara forced herself to look away. She explored the rest of the ground floor quickly, unease pushing her forward. A narrow hallway led to a bathroom and what looked like a study, desk, filing cabinets, more shelves. More dolls. Some sat at the desk, hands folded as if in thought. One was positioned in the chair behind it, staring at the wall. Okay, Mara said, voice shaking now. Okay. She took the stairs 2 at a time. The second floor creaked with every step, the wood complaining loudly beneath her weight. A narrow landing branched into 2 bedrooms and a smaller room at the end of the hall. The first bedroom contained a neatly made bed, a dresser, and, unsurprisingly, dolls. They lined the headboard, sat on the dresser, leaned against the wall in the corner. The second bedroom was much the same. The small room at the end of the hall stopped her cold. It was a child's room. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, patterned with cheerful animals that had lost most of their color. A small bed sat against one wall, its quilt folded precisely. Shelves covered the remaining space from floor to ceiling. Every shelf was filled with dolls. Not arranged neatly this time. They were crowded together, limbs tangled, faces pressed close. Their eyes, glass, painted, button, caught the dim light from the single window and reflected it back in a chaotic scatter. Mara felt dizzy. I'm not sleeping in here, she said firmly, backing away. As she turned, her elbow brushed the doorframe. Something clicked. She froze. The sound had come from behind her, soft and precise. Like porcelain touching porcelain. Slowly, she turned back toward the room. Nothing had changed. The dolls were exactly as they had been. Tangled, still, silent. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest. Get a grip, she whispered. You're tired. You're imagining things. She chose the first bedroom, the one with fewer dolls, and closed the door behind her, grateful for the thin barrier of wood. She set her bag on the bed and began unpacking mechanically, focusing on the familiar motions to ground herself. Folded clothes, toiletries, her phone, still no signal. She set it aside with a sigh. From somewhere downstairs, a soft sound drifted upward. A faint scrape. Mara froze, shirt halfway folded in her hands. The sound came again. Slow, deliberate, scrape. It reminded her of something being dragged across wood. She moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. The sound stopped. Silence returned, thicker than before. After a long moment, she opened the door and peered into the hallway. Empty. The dolls outside her room sat exactly where they had been, their painted faces serene. She checked the stairs, the kitchen, the sitting room. Everything was unchanged. Mara stood alone in the center of the sitting room, heart pounding, surrounded by unmoving eyes. "I'm just not used to being this alone," she told the dolls. "That's all." None of them answered. She cooked a simple dinner as the light outside faded, the farmhouse sinking into shadow. She ate at the long table, choosing the chair farthest from the identical dolls on the counter. When she finished, she noticed there were still 2 empty chairs facing her. She did not sit in them. Night fell completely, the fields outside swallowed by darkness. The house creaked and settled around her, wood contracting as the temperature dropped. The dolls seemed to absorb the shadows, their shapes blurring at the edges until she forced herself to look directly at them again. She went to bed early, exhaustion finally outweighing fear. Sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of eyes, of porcelain hands closing around her wrists, of being watched from every angle at once. At some point, she woke suddenly, heart racing. The room was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through the curtains. She sensed it before she saw it. The weight of attention. Mara turned her head slowly toward the dresser. One of the dolls was no longer on the shelf. It stood on the floor beside the bed, close enough that she could see the fine cracks in its porcelain face. Close enough that she could swear its glass eyes were warmer than the air around them. Mara held her breath, terror locking her muscles in place. "I didn't move you," she whispered. The doll did not answer. But somewhere in the farmhouse, wood creaked softly, as if something had just taken its first careful step. Chapter 2: Porcelain Eyes That Follow. Mara did not scream. The instinct was there, burning, immediate, but something colder held it down. Her body lay rigid beneath the quilt, breath trapped halfway between inhale and exhale, eyes locked on the doll standing beside her bed. Moonlight spilled across its porcelain face, catching in the tiny cracks along its cheek and making them look like veins beneath skin. It was one of the smaller ones. Child-sized only in suggestion, not scale. Its dress hung stiffly, starched long ago, and its shoes were scuffed at the toes as if it had been walked in. Mara squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them again. The doll had not moved. "That's good," she whispered hoarsely. "That's good." Her heart pounded so hard she was sure it must be audible. She reached for the bedside lamp, fingers trembling violently. The click sounded deafening in the quiet room. Light flooded the space. The doll was gone. Mara bolted upright, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her eyes darted wildly across the room, the dresser, the shelves, the door, the corner shadows. Nothing. The doll was back on the shelf, seated exactly where it had been when she went to sleep. She stared at it until her eyes burned. "No," she said, voice shaking. "No, no, no." She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, keeping her eyes fixed on the doll as she backed toward the door. Every instinct screamed that turning away was a mistake. She fumbled for the handle, twisted it, and pulled the door open. The hallway beyond was empty. Too empty. She stepped out, light from her room spilling across the floorboards. The dolls along the hallway walls sat in their places, their shadows long and distorted. But something was wrong. They were facing her door. All of them. Mara's breath hitched. Slowly, carefully, she looked back into her room. The doll on the shelf was still there. Facing the door. Facing her. She shut the door hard, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot. She leaned against it, shaking, palms slick with sweat. "This isn't happening," she whispered. "I'm dreaming. Or sleepwalking. Or..." A soft sound interrupted her thoughts. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the other side of the door. Mara froze. The tapping was gentle, rhythmic, as if made by something very small and very patient. She backed away slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched. Then something slid beneath the door. Mara stared at it, bile rising in her throat. A strip of fabric, faded rose-colored cotton. The doll's dress. She screamed then. The sound tore out of her, raw and desperate, filling the house and bouncing off the walls. She ran, bare feet slapping against the wood as she fled down the hallway and down the stairs, not daring to look back. The sitting room welcomed her with its sea of glass eyes and porcelain smiles. She skidded to a halt, chest heaving, surrounded by dolls staring inward from every direction. Her scream died in her throat. They were closer than before. Not by much. Just enough. Some leaned differently on their shelves. Some sat with their heads tilted at new angles. One that had been perched on the mantel now sat on the arm of the couch. She could see it clearly now. Tiny fingerprints smudged the dust on the wood beneath them. Mara staggered backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. Her mind raced, grasping at logic like a lifeline. Old houses settled. Air currents shifted things. She had been panicking, imagining patterns where none existed. But the fabric beneath her door. She forced herself to move, to act. She grabbed her phone from her pocket and dialed the only number she could think of, emergency services. No signal. She tried again. And again. Nothing. Her gaze flicked to the front door. She ran to it and yanked on the handle. It did not move. She tried again, harder this time, bracing her foot against the doorframe and pulling with all her strength. The door shuddered but remained closed, as solid and unmoving as the walls around it. "Open," she shouted, slamming her fist against the wood. "Please." The door did not respond. Behind her, something shifted. Mara turned slowly. A doll stood in the center of the sitting room. She was certain it hadn't been there before. This one was larger than the others, nearly 2 feet tall, with carefully painted features and real human hair braided neatly down its back. It wore a white dress yellowed with age, lace collar frayed at the edges. Its glass eyes reflected Mara perfectly. "You're not real," Mara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're not real." The doll's head tilted, just slightly. Mara backed away until her shoulders hit the door. Her legs trembled violently, threatening to give out beneath her. "Please," she said, "I won't touch you. I won't move you. I'll leave everything exactly how it is." The doll did not move. But another did. Then another. One by one, dolls shifted from their places, stepping, or sliding, or something in between, into the open space of the room. They moved with jerky, uncertain motions, as if still learning how weight and balance worked. Their porcelain limbs clicked softly as they repositioned themselves. Mara slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, hands over her mouth to keep from screaming again. "What do you want?" she sobbed. The dolls stopped. They stood in a loose semicircle, all facing her. One of them opened its mouth. The sound that came out was not a voice. It was a breath. A shallow, wet inhale, as if drawn through a throat unused to air. Mara screamed again. The dolls lunged. She scrambled sideways, barely avoiding grasping porcelain hands. She ran for the kitchen, adrenaline screaming through her veins. She burst through the doorway, skidding across the clean tile floor. The 3 identical dolls still stood on the counter. They turned their heads in perfect unison to watch her. "No," Mara gasped. She grabbed a chair and swung it wildly, striking the counter and sending one of the dolls tumbling to the floor. It shattered on impact, porcelain exploding outward in a spray of white shards. The sound was sharp and final. Mara stared at the broken pieces, chest heaving. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the farmhouse screamed. The sound tore through the walls, a high, keening wail that rattled the cabinets and made the lights flicker violently. The remaining dolls convulsed, their bodies shuddering as if in pain. Mara clapped her hands over her ears and collapsed to her knees. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The scream cut off abruptly. Silence slammed down, heavy and suffocating. Slowly, Mara lowered her hands. The broken doll was gone. The counter was clean. 3 identical dolls stood where they always had, dresses smooth, button eyes empty. As if nothing had happened. Mara's mind fractured. She laughed then, a thin, hysterical sound that didn't feel like it belonged to her. "You're lying," she whispered. "You're all lying." She fled the kitchen and locked herself in the bathroom, slamming the door shut and twisting the ancient lock until it clicked. She slid down against the tub, knees drawn to her chest, shaking uncontrollably. The bathroom was small, windowless, lit by a single flickering bulb. A mirror hung above the sink. She avoided looking at it. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time stretched and warped, impossible to measure. Finally, when her breathing slowed enough that she could think again, she dared to glance up. Her reflection stared back at her. Her face was pale, eyes bloodshot, hair tangled around her shoulders. And behind her, something stood in the doorway. Mara screamed and spun around. The bathroom was empty. She looked back at the mirror. Her reflection was still screaming. She clamped her mouth shut. Her reflection did not. It continued to scream silently, mouth open far too wide, eyes bulging with terror. Then its gaze shifted. It looked past her, down. Mara followed its stare with dread crawling up her spine. On the floor, between her bare feet, sat a small porcelain doll. Its glass eyes stared up at her lovingly. And this time, she watched it blink. Chapter 3: When the house stops pretending. By the third night, the farmhouse no longer bothered hiding what it was. Mara woke to the sound of breathing that did not belong to her. It was shallow and rhythmic, almost polite, as if whoever, or whatever, was doing it was trying not to wake her. The air in the bedroom felt thicker than before, heavy with the scent of dust and old fabric. Moonlight pressed through the thin curtains, casting pale rectangles across the floorboards. She lay still, eyes open, counting the seconds between breaths. 1, 2, 3. The breathing was coming from the corner. She did not turn her head. She had learned, instinctively, that looking directly at the dolls when they wanted attention only encouraged them. Instead, she focused on the small crack in the ceiling above her bed, tracing its familiar spiderweb shape with her eyes. The breathing stopped. A soft, porcelain click followed, like 2 ceramic teeth tapping together. "Mara," a voice whispered. It was wrong. Not because it spoke, but because it spoke like her. The cadence, the slight hesitation before the second syllable of her name, it was a perfect mimicry. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure it would wake the entire house. "I know you're awake." The voice came closer, accompanied by the faint scrape of something being dragged across wood. Mara squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers curling into the blanket as if she could anchor herself to the bed. "You moved us again," the voice said. There was no anger in it. Only disappointment. "I didn't," Mara whispered before she could stop herself. Silence fell so abruptly it felt physical. Then the weight appeared on the edge of the mattress. The bed dipped, springs creaking under a pressure that was far too heavy for porcelain. The smell of old paint and mildew grew stronger, and Mara felt a cold presence hovering inches from her face. "Liar," the voice said softly. Something brushed her cheek. Not a hand, too smooth, too unyielding. A porcelain finger. Mara screamed and bolted upright, swinging blindly. Her hand passed through empty air. The bed sprang back into place, the pressure gone. The room was empty. No dolls. No shadows in the corners. only her own ragged breathing and the echo of her scream fading into the walls. She did not sleep again. Morning arrived reluctantly, filtered through gray clouds that promised more snow. The storm had not stopped since her arrival. It had only deepened, piling drifts against the farmhouse until the lower windows were nearly buried. Mara wrapped herself in her coat and stepped into the hallway, her boots echoing too loudly in the silence. Every door was open. She was certain she had closed them the night before. The guest room at the end of the hall, the one she had avoided since seeing it filled with dolls, was no longer empty. They were everywhere now, not just lined against the walls or seated on shelves. They stood in the center of the room in a loose circle, facing inward, as if attending a meeting. Their glass eyes reflected the dim light in dull pinpricks, each one fixed on something she could not see. Or someone. Mara's stomach twisted. "I didn't move you," she said aloud, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "I swear." One of the dolls, a girl in a faded blue dress with a cracked cheek, turned its head. The movement was slow, deliberate, accompanied by the faint squeal of porcelain grinding against porcelain. "You always say that," the doll replied. Mara stumbled backward, colliding with the hallway wall. The sound of her impact echoed down the corridor, yet the house itself remained unnervingly still, as if holding its breath. "You weren't supposed to hear us yet," another voice chimed in. This one sounded younger, thinner, like a child speaking through clenched teeth. "You're early." "Early for what?" Mara demanded. The dolls did not answer. Instead, they turned back toward the center of their circle, their attention drifting away from her as if she were no longer relevant. The unspoken dismissal hurt more than the fear. She backed away slowly and fled downstairs. The farmhouse had rules. Mara learned them quickly, though no one explained them outright. Do not touch the dolls after sunset. Do not move them once they have chosen a place. Do not lock doors. Do not break porcelain. Each rule revealed itself through consequence. When Mara tried to shove a doll aside to reach the pantry, she found her hand stuck fast to its painted dress, her skin burning as if pressed against ice. The doll smiled, a tiny, cruel curl of painted lips, until she begged aloud for forgiveness. When she locked herself in the bathroom, the pipes screamed so violently the mirror shattered, shards embedding themselves in the door like thrown knives. And when she knocked one of the smaller dolls from a shelf, its porcelain head cracking on the floor, the farmhouse wailed. Not a sound of wind or wood settling, but a long, grief-stricken cry that vibrated through the walls and into her bones. Every doll in the house turned toward her at once. She did not make that mistake again. Isolation gnawed at her sanity. The storm showed no sign of breaking, and her phone remained stubbornly dead, its screen flickering occasionally with static that resembled faces if she stared too long. The radio emitted only whispers beneath the hiss, fragments of conversations that sounded like arguments carried through water. "She shouldn't be here. They never leave when they're supposed to. She'll learn." Mara smashed the radio with a fireplace poker after it spoke her name. The dolls watched from the doorway as she did it. By the fifth day, or what she thought was the fifth day, Mara could no longer trust time. The clocks in the house disagreed with one another. The grandfather clock in the living room ticked backward, its pendulum swinging in a lazy, mocking rhythm. Her wristwatch stopped entirely, its hands frozen at 3:17. Outside, the sky remained an unchanging gray, as if the sun had given up on reaching the farmhouse. The dolls began appearing in her reflections. At first, it was subtle. A porcelain face behind her shoulder in the darkened TV screen. A small hand resting on her arm in the mirror above the sink, vanishing when she turned. Then they stopped vanishing. Mara brushed her teeth one morning and found 3 dolls standing behind her in the mirror, their mouths opening and closing in silent laughter. When she spun around, they were gone. Yet their reflections remained, grinning at her from the glass. "You're seeing us now," one of them said, its voice echoing faintly as if trapped between worlds. "That means you're almost ready." "For what?" Mara whispered. The doll tilted its head. "To stay." Something in her chest cracked open at that word. Stay. The farmhouse did not want her dead. It wanted her here. She remembered Eleanor's voice, the woman who had given her the keys. Remembered the way her smile hadn't reached her eyes. "They don't like to be alone," Eleanor had said. Neither did the farmhouse. That night, the dolls came to her openly. Mara sat in the living room, the fireplace cold despite the roaring storm outside, her back pressed against the wall. She clutched a kitchen knife in trembling hands, its blade dull from failed attempts to scratch symbols into the wood, anything to mark the space as hers. The dolls emerged from every doorway, descending the stairs, stepping out from behind furniture. There were dozens of them now, more than she remembered seeing before, their numbers swelling as if the house itself was creating them. They formed a semicircle around her. "You keep fighting," said the doll with the cracked cheek. "Why?" "I want to leave," Mara replied hoarsely. A murmur rippled through them, tiny porcelain laughs, disapproving clicks. "No one leaves," another doll said gently. "They just change." The air grew colder. Mara's breath fogged in front of her face as the dolls drew closer, their glass eyes reflecting her fear back at her 100-fold. "We were like you once," the cracked cheek doll continued. "Guests. Caretakers. Children brought here by accident." "People," Mara said. "Yes," the doll agreed. "People who stayed too long." Mara shook her head violently. "No, you're lying." The dolls parted, revealing something behind them. A mirror. It had not been there before. Tall and oval, its surface rippling like water. Mara stared into it and felt her stomach drop. The reflection staring back was not entirely hers. Her eyes were too shiny. Her smile, slowly spreading across her face without her permission, was stiff, painted. Fine cracks traced her cheeks, branching outward like veins. "No," she whispered. The reflection lifted its hand. So did she. The dolls leaned in, their voices overlapping in a soft, hypnotic chorus. "The house remembers everyone," they sang. "And it never lets go." As the mirror's surface hardened, turning cold and unyielding beneath her fingertips, Mara realized the truth that had been waiting for her since the first night. The farmhouse did not create the dolls. It kept them. And it was making room for one more. Chapter 4: The History That Breathes. Mara did not sleep. She sat on the living room floor with her back to the wall, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the mirror that had appeared where the bookshelf once stood. It no longer rippled. Its surface was smooth, glossy, and mercilessly still. Her reflection stared back at her with unsettling patience, mouth relaxed into a neutral expression that did not quite match her own terror. When she blinked, the reflection blinked a half-second later. That delay was enough to make her stomach churn. The dolls had retreated after revealing the mirror, melting back into the house as if absorbed by it. Their footsteps faded into the walls, leaving behind a silence so complete it rang in her ears. The farmhouse creaked softly around her, not in protest, but in contentment. It was waiting. Mara rose slowly, every joint aching as if she had aged years overnight. She avoided looking at the mirror as she moved, keeping her gaze fixed on the floorboards, tracing familiar knots in the wood to ground herself in reality. The house felt different now, less hostile, more intimate. Like a predator that no longer needed to hide. She needed answers. The thought arrived fully formed, sharp and urgent. The dolls had said they were once people. Guests. Caretakers. Children. That meant there had to be records. Evidence. Something left behind by someone who had realized the truth too late but tried to warn others anyway. The study. She had avoided the small room near the back of the house since her arrival. Its door was always closed, its handle cold to the touch. Now, as she approached it, the knob turned easily beneath her fingers, almost eager. The smell hit her first. Old paper, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like blood long since dried into fabric. The study was small and cramped, its single window nearly buried under snow. Shelves lined the walls, sagging beneath the weight of ledgers, notebooks, and loose stacks of paper yellowed with age. Mara stepped inside and shut the door behind her. The temperature dropped instantly. Her breath fogged as she crossed the room and pulled the nearest notebook from the shelf. The cover was leather, cracked and soft, the initials EH embossed on the front. Eleanor. Her pulse quickened. She flipped the notebook open and began to read. December 3rd. They arrived early this year. I could hear them whispering in the walls before the first snowfall. Mara swallowed and continued. December 10th. I tried locking the guest rooms. The house did not like that. Neither did they. The handwriting grew shakier as the entries progressed, ink blotted by trembling hands. January 2nd. I caught my reflection smiling when I wasn't. I covered the mirrors, but it only made them angry. Mara's grip tightened on the notebook. January 14th. The dolls are not alive the way we are. They are memories given shape. The house collects them, preserves them. Her chest felt tight, as if the words themselves were squeezing her lungs. Another notebook slipped from the shelf as she turned, landing open at her feet. This one was older, its pages brittle, the handwriting looping and archaic. We built the dolls to keep the children company during the winters. Long months. Too much snow. Too much silence. A child's handwriting appeared between the lines, smaller and less controlled. They listened better than grown-ups. Mara sank onto the chair, surrounded by the weight of decades, no, centuries, of isolation and slow, creeping madness. The farmhouse had once been a refuge. A place for families trapped by winter, for travelers stranded by storms. The dolls had been toys, comfort objects meant to ease loneliness. Until the house learned what loneliness was. It had listened, watched, remembered, and when people left, it kept something behind. A soft knock came from the study door. Mara froze. Mara, a familiar voice called gently. It's cold in here. Her mother's voice. Mara squeezed her eyes shut. You're not real, she whispered. The doorknob turned. The door opened. Her mother stood in the doorway, wrapped in the coat she'd worn the last winter they'd spoken. Snow dusted her hair. Her smile was warm, tired, achingly familiar. You shouldn't shut yourself away, her mother said, stepping into the room. You always did that when you were scared. Mara's heart shattered against her ribs. I buried you, she said, her voice breaking. I watched them lower the coffin. Her mother's smile faltered, just for a moment. Yes, she said softly. And then you left. The words hit harder than any accusation. Behind her mother, dolls began to appear in the doorway, their faces solemn, almost reverent. The mirror shimmered faintly in the hallway beyond, its surface darkening like deep water. You stayed away, her mother continued, her voice echoing slightly now, as if spoken from a distance. Just like everyone else. Mara shook her head violently. This isn't my fault. No, her mother agreed. But it can be fixed. She reached out, her fingers brushing Mara's cheek. Her touch was cold, porcelain cold. All you have to do, she whispered, is stay. The study door slammed shut behind her. Mara screamed. She lunged backward, knocking the chair over, clutching the notebooks to her chest as if they could protect her. Her mother's face cracked, fine lines spider webbing across her skin, eyes turning glassy and hollow. The dolls surged forward. No, Mara shouted, scrambling toward the window. She smashed the glass with her elbow, pain exploding up her arm as shards tore into her skin. Cold air rushed in, sharp and invigorating. Real. She hurled herself through the window and tumbled into the snow. The storm swallowed her instantly. The farmhouse loomed behind her, dark against the white, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. She staggered to her feet and ran, snow sucking at her boots, lungs burning with each breath. The dolls followed. They did not sink into the snow. They glided over it, dresses pristine, porcelain limbs unbothered by the cold. Their voices carried easily through the wind. "You can't leave," they sang. Mara's vision blurred as the trees closed in around her. The forest was a maze of black trunks and drifting white, the path she had arrived on long since erased. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed into the snow, sobbing. The dolls formed a circle around her, their shadows stretching unnaturally long beneath the storm-darkened sky. The cracked-cheeked doll stepped forward. "You already belong to the house," it said gently. "You just haven't accepted it yet." Mara looked down at her hands. They were pale, smooth. A thin crack traced the skin of her wrist, just beneath the sleeve of her coat. Her scream was lost to the wind as the farmhouse doors opened wide, welcoming her home. Chapter 5: The Lie of Escape. The farmhouse did not drag Mara back inside. That was the cruelest part. She woke face down in the snow, lungs burning, the storm quieter now, its fury dulled to a steady, whispering fall. For a moment, hope flared in her chest so sharply it almost hurt. The house loomed in the distance, but it was farther away than she expected, its shape softened by the white haze. She was outside. Her hands, she lifted them slowly, fear tightening every muscle, looked mostly normal. Pale, yes. Cold, yes. But the cracks she'd seen before were faint now, hairline fractures that could almost be imagined. When she flexed her fingers, they moved freely. The dolls were gone. Mara pushed herself upright, swaying. Her breath came out in ragged clouds as she scanned the treeline. No porcelain faces. No glassy eyes watching from behind trunks. Just snow, forest, silence. A path emerged beneath her gaze, narrow but unmistakable. A line of trampled snow winding away from the farmhouse, disappearing between the trees. Her heart slammed against her ribs. A way out. She staggered to her feet and followed it. The forest felt different than before. Where earlier it had been oppressive, closing in on her from all sides, now it seemed almost cooperative. Branches bowed under the weight of snow instead of snapping. The wind guided her forward instead of shoving her back. Even the cold felt purposeful, sharp enough to keep her awake. Mara laughed once, a broken, hysterical sound, and clamped a hand over her mouth. Don't trust it. But every step she took carried her farther from the farmhouse. The glow of its windows faded until it was nothing more than a dark suggestion behind her. The path led her to a clearing. A road. Actual asphalt, cracked and half buried beneath snow, but unmistakably real. Tire tracks cut through the drifts, fresh enough to still hold their shape. Mara dropped to her knees and sobbed. "I made it," she whispered, pressing her forehead to the frozen ground. "I made it." Headlights appeared through the snowfall. She scrambled upright, waving her arms wildly as the vehicle slowed. A battered pickup truck rolled to a stop beside her, engine idling, heat fogging the air. The driver's window slid down. "Jesus," a man said, staring at her. "You look like hell." Mara laughed again, the sound teetering on the edge of madness. "You don't even know." The man climbed out of the truck, wrapping his coat tighter around himself. He was middle-aged, his beard flecked with gray, his eyes sharp and wary in a way that spoke of long winters and worse roads. "You from the old farmhouse?" he asked. Mara froze. "Yes." He grimaced. "Figures. That place still doing this?" "Doing what?" she asked. The man hesitated, studying her face. "Keeping people." Her stomach twisted. "You know about it," she said. He nodded slowly. My family lived out here once. Long time ago. Folks used to go missing every winter. Storms would clear, roads would open, but some houses stayed empty." He paused. "Yours never did." Mara felt cold seep deeper into her bones. "Then why is it letting me leave?" The man met her gaze, something like pity flickering across his face. "It always does," he said. Eventually, the ride was quiet. The heater blasted hot air that made Mara's skin prickle painfully as circulation returned. She cradled a cup of coffee. The man, Jonah, he'd said, handed her, the warmth grounding, real. They drove for what felt like hours. The road stretching endlessly ahead. Snow gave way to slush, then bare asphalt. Trees thinned. Street lights appeared, their orange glow slicing through the gloom. Mara's shoulders loosened for the first time since her arrival. She stared out the window and caught her reflection in the glass. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then the reflection smiled. Mara's breath hitched. She turned her head sharply, staring at Jonah. He was focused on the road, unaware. She looked back. Her reflection's eyes were wrong. Too glossy. Too still. Fine cracks traced the corners of her mouth, faint but undeniable. "No," she whispered. The reflection raised its hand. Mara did not. She jerked away from the window, heart racing. "Are you okay?" Jonah asked, glancing at her. I need to stop," she said. "I think I'm still in shock." He nodded. "There's a motel up ahead. We'll pull in." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by dread she couldn't explain. The motel sign flickered in the distance. Vacancy. The letters buzzed softly, their glow reflected in the truck's windshield. The room was warm. Too warm. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. The cracks were clearer now, branching delicately across her skin like fine china. When she pressed her thumb against her wrist, she felt resistance, not flesh yielding, but something harder beneath. Porcelain. She staggered to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back at her was almost her. Same eyes, same hair, but her skin had a faint sheen, smooth and flawless in a way living skin never was. When she smiled, she tried not to, but it happened anyway. It was stiff, practiced. Behind her reflection, something moved. A small shape appeared near the door, then another. Dolls. Not the same ones from the farmhouse. These were new. Their faces were blank, unfinished, as if waiting for features to be painted on. Her stomach dropped. "They're not supposed to be here," she whispered. The dolls tilted their heads in unison. "We go where you go now," one of them said. The motel room shuddered. The walls creaked, wood stretching and settling in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. The faint scent of old dust and mildew seeped into the air. Mara backed away from the mirror, shaking her head. "No," she said. "I left. I escaped." The reflection smiled wider. "There is no leaving," it said. "Only spreading." The walls darkened, their bland paint peeling back to reveal familiar wood beneath, knotted floorboards, aged beams. The motel's hum faded, replaced by the soft, contented creak of the farmhouse. Outside the window, snow began to fall. Mara screamed as the dolls closed in, their voices overlapping in gentle, soothing tones. "Don't be afraid," they whispered. "You'll never be lonely again." Chapter 6. The Last Doll. The scream never reached the hallway. Mara felt it tear through her chest, vibrate in her throat, and then vanish, swallowed whole by the room as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. The motel was gone now. There was no buzzing light, no threadbare carpet, no humming ice machine down the hall. The space around her had finished changing. She was home again. The farmhouse living room stretched wide and familiar, its warped floorboards gleaming softly in firelight that had no source. Snow tapped gently against the windows, though she did not remember there being windows on this side of the room. The dolls stood in a loose semicircle, their porcelain faces illuminated from below, their expressions reverent. Mara staggered backward until her calves hit the sofa. "No," she whispered. "You said I could leave." The cracked-cheeked doll stepped forward. Its movements were smoother now, more confident, its joints barely clicking as it walked. "And you did," it said kindly. "Just like the others." Mara's reflection appeared in the tall mirror near the staircase. It was no longer delayed. It moved with her perfectly, smiling when she smiled, trembling when she trembled. The cracks in its skin had spread, branching across its face in an intricate web, beautiful in a horrifying way. "You didn't escape," the reflection said. "You expanded." Mara clutched her chest as pain bloomed beneath her ribs. Not sharp, but deep and grinding, as if something inside her were hardening, setting into place. She gasped and fell to her knees. Her heartbeat slowed. Each thud grew heavier, more deliberate, until it no longer felt like flesh pumping blood, but something else, something mechanical, something hollow and resonant. "I'm still me," she said, though the words felt increasingly untrue. "I still feel." The dolls watched her with something like sympathy. "So did we," one said. Memories flooded her mind without warning. Not her memories. A woman rocking a porcelain doll beside a frozen window, whispering to it so she wouldn't whisper to herself. A child pressing a doll's cold face to his cheek while the storm buried the farmhouse deeper and deeper. A caretaker stitching cracked porcelain by candlelight, apologizing softly to the thing in her lap. Loneliness. Layer upon layer of it, stacked through generations. The house had not fed on suffering. It had answered it. Mara screamed again as her hands hit the floor. The sound they made was wrong. Not flesh on wood, but ceramic tapping against plank. She stared in horror as pale fissures raced up her fingers, sealing themselves smooth and seamless a heartbeat later. "No," she sobbed. "Please." The cracked-cheeked doll knelt in front of her. "There's one last thing," it said gently. "You need to choose where you belong." The mirror shimmered. Mara saw two versions of herself reflected now. One was almost gone. Skin fully porcelain, eyes glassy and still, mouth fixed in a soft, welcoming smile. A doll. The other still looked human, but her edges were blurred, her form unstable, like a reflection in water disturbed by wind. The house creaked, impatient but not unkind. "Every doll has a place," the cracked-cheek one said. "A room, a role." Mara's vision tunneled. Her thoughts scattered like leaves in the storm. She clung to one thing, one stubborn, defiant ember of self. "If I become one of you," she whispered, "let me help them." The dolls tilted their heads. "The guests," Mara said. "The ones who come next. Let me be the warning." The house was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, it sighed. When the storm ended weeks later, the farmhouse stood unchanged at the end of the road. A woman named Eleanor unlocked the front door and stepped inside, dusting snow from her coat. She paused, scanning the living room, her gaze lingering on a new addition beside the fireplace. A porcelain doll sat on the shelf. It was beautifully made, dark hair, careful features, eyes that seemed almost alive. Its hands were clasped in its lap, its expression solemn rather than smiling. Eleanor frowned. "I don't remember you," she murmured. The doll's glass eyes caught the light. For just a moment, Eleanor thought she saw fear in them. Later that evening, headlights appeared at the edge of the property. A car pulled into the drive, its engine cutting out as a young couple stepped into the snow, laughing nervously as the wind howled around them. The farmhouse lights flickered on, warm and inviting. Inside, the dolls turned their heads toward the door. All except one. The newest doll stared straight ahead, her gaze fixed on the doorframe, cracks faint but visible beneath the glaze of her porcelain skin. If she could still scream, she would have. But dolls were very good at staying quiet. And the house was already listening. For more stories, like and subscribe.